There's something strange about the phrase fruit of the Spirit. Most people hear it and immediately think of morality. Be kind. Be patient. Try harder. Don't lose your temper in traffic. Don't snap at your family. But when Paul wrote those words in Greek almost 2,000 years ago, he wasn't handing people a checklist for behaving better. He was describing what slowly grows inside a person when their inner life begins to change. And honestly, that changes the whole feeling of the passage. And because fruit doesn't appear overnight. Nobody plants a tree on Monday and expects oranges by Friday. Fruit grows quietly, slowly, sometimes so slowly you barely notice it happening, until one day you realize your reactions are different. Your fears don't control you the same way. Your anger burns shorter. Your heart feels softer toward people you used to avoid. In the original Greek word Paul uses for fruit is karpos. It can mean literal fruit, of course, but it also meant the visible result of something alive beneath the surface. In other words, these qualities weren't supposed to be forced performances. They were evidence. Signs of an inward transformation, and the timing of this matters. And Paul wrote this letter to communities living under pressure from the Roman world. Violence was normal. Public humiliation was entertainment. Status mattered constantly. People were divided by wealth, ethnicity, power, and religion. Into that atmosphere, Paul describes a completely different kind of human being, and not powerful in the Roman sense, not feared. Not dominant, but deeply changed. And the first word he names is love. In Greek, agape, and this word is bigger than emotion, bigger than attraction, bigger than simple affection. Agape was a kind of costly love. A decision to seek someone else's good, even when it required sacrifice. That sounds beautiful until it becomes practical. Because agape is hardest in ordinary moments. It's easy to feel loving toward people who admire you. It's harder when someone disappoints you for the 5th time. Harder when your pride is bruised. Harder when nobody notices your effort. Listen, the ancient world had words for romantic love and friendship already. But agape was different. Early Christians used it almost like they were trying to describe something new entirely. A kind of love that absorbs injury without immediately demanding revenge. And honestly, most people don't naturally drift toward that, and human beings drift toward self-protection, and which is why Paul treats agape almost like evidence that God is reshaping a person from the inside out. And then comes joy. And the Greek word is chara, and it doesn't mean constant happiness. That's important. Happiness usually depends on circumstances cooperating with you. Chara was deeper than that. It carried the sense of inner gladness rooted in grace. Something stable underneath changing conditions, and you can actually see this difference in people sometimes. There are people who laugh easily when life is easy, but collapse emotionally the moment things fall apart. And then there are people who have suffered deeply, lost things, buried people they loved, faced uncertainty for years, and somehow still carry this quiet steadiness. Not denial, not pretending, just an anchored soul, and that's closer to what Paul meant. And then peace, the Greek word is iren, but behind it stands the older Hebrew idea of shalom, not just the absence of conflict. Wholeness, harmony, things set back into their proper place, and that's very different from modern ideas of peace. And most people today think peace means escaping stress, a weekend off, silence. No emails, no bad news, but biblical peace could exist even in difficulty. It described an inner condition where fear no longer ruled every decision, and that's rare in it, because fear quietly shapes so much of human behavior. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of being forgotten, fear of not having enough, fear of losing control. And then sometimes people look calm on the outside while their inner world feels like a room full of alarms. And Paul's point wasn't that spiritual people never struggled. It was that something new could begin growing even there. And not instantly, not perfectly, but genuinely, and maybe that's why this passage has survived for centuries. Because even now, modern people are exhausted by performance, exhausted by pretending, exhausted by trying to build identity entirely from success, image, productivity, or public approval. And the fruit of the Spirit describes another possibility and a different kind of strength, one that grows slowly in hidden places first. Paul continues with patience, and this one becomes uncomfortable almost immediately. The Greek word is makrothemia, literally something like long-tempered, not short-tempered, long-tempered. The ability to endure frustration without exploding. And honestly, that feels almost unnatural now. And people live fast. Reactions are instant. Opinions are instant. Anger is instant. Someone says one wrong thing online, and within minutes, thousands of strangers are tearing them apart. Even daily life trains impatience into people. Slow internet feels unbearable. A delayed reply feels personal. Waiting in line for 5 minutes feels offensive somehow. But macrothemia described a person who could absorb irritation without immediately throwing it back into the world, and not weakness. Restraint, and there's a difference. You can usually tell when someone lacks this fruit because every inconvenience becomes a crisis. Every disagreement becomes a war. Their emotions control the room constantly. And Paul had seen enough violence in human relationships to know patience wasn't softness. It was strength under control. And then he says kindness, and the Greek word here is chrestos. It carries the sense of generosity in action, a goodness that feels gentle and approachable, not cold morality. And this matters because some people become technically righteous while becoming emotionally harsh. And you've probably met someone like that before. And people who know the correct words, the correct beliefs, the correct arguments, but when you leave their presence, you feel smaller instead of healed. And kindness in the biblical sense wasn't shallow niceness. It was a way of treating people that restored dignity, and Jesus embodied this constantly. You see it in small moments, the way he stopped for people others ignored, the way he spoke to the sick without disgust, the way children seemed strangely comfortable around him when powerful religious leaders usually frighten people, and real kindness has texture to it. It notices people, and honestly, people remember kindness for years in a sentence, a small act, someone patient during your worst season. Someone who listened carefully when you expected judgment. Most people carry those memories for the rest of their lives. And then comes goodness. In Greek, agathosine. And this word is harder to define because it goes deeper than pleasant behavior. It means moral integrity that actively seeks what is right, and not performative goodness, and not image management's real goodness. And those are not always the same thing, because a person can appear good publicly while privately becoming manipulative, proud, dishonest, or cruel. Ancient writers understood this tension well. They knew human beings were capable of polishing the outside while hiding chaos underneath, and agathosine meant alignment between inner character and outward actions, and which is probably why it's rare. And then faithfulness, and the Greek word is pistis, which can also mean faith, trust, reliability. At its core, it describes someone dependable, and that sounds simple until you realize how fragile commitment has become, and people quit relationships quickly. Quit communities quickly. Quit promises quickly. Attention shifts constantly, but pest describes someone steady, someone whose loyalty survives inconvenience. And honestly, some of the most spiritually mature people aren't dramatic at all. They're just deeply reliable. The kind of people who quietly show up over and over again. The kind who keep praying even when they feel nothing. Keep loving their family through exhausting years. Keep telling the truth when lying would be easier. And faithfulness usually looks ordinary while it's happening. That's the strange thing. And most deep virtues do. And then gentleness. The Greek word is prots. And unfortunately, modern ears hear gentleness as weakness immediately. But in the ancient world, prots was often used to describe strength that had become disciplined, and a wild horse trained for trust, and a powerful person who no longer needed to dominate. And Jesus actually describes himself this way. Gentle and humble in heart, which is striking because he wasn't passive. He confronted hypocrisy. He challenged corrupt systems. He endured suffering without becoming vicious, and gentleness doesn't mean having no powers. It means power no longer controlled by ego. And finally, Paul reaches self-control, ekkrateia, mastery over one's own desires and not repression. Not pretending temptation disappears in mastery, because human beings are full of appetites that easily become destructive when left unchecked. Anger, lust, greed, envy, pride. Even good things can slowly become consuming things. And honestly, one of the hardest battles people fight is against themselves, and against impulses they regret later, against habits they swore they'd stop, against the strange human tendency to damage the very things they love. New Paul understood all of this. That's why the fruit of the Spirit was never about appearing religious. It was about becoming whole, and slowly and painfully sometimes, but truly changed from the inside out.